always remember two things in any writing assignment: context and scope. What's the context of your writing and the scope of your writing? How broad you want to be, or how focused you want to be in your writing, and what context, what's the context of your write-up? Otherwise, you may miss the point. I do research in two subdisciplines in biology and in the biomedical field at large. Cancer research, specifically related to breast cancer and leukemia. And I also do research related to cardiomyopathies that are associated with mutations in genes which encode for proteins that are expressed in the cell, in the nucleus. There is so much overlap in signaling and molecular biology between the cancer field and the cardiovascular field, and much of the signaling pathways and the key proteins that play a role in cancer happen to be malfunctioning in diseases in the cardiovascular system, such as in cardiomyopathies. I happen to be interested in a select panel of proteins that basically play a role in the nucleus, particularly in the matrix and also in the lamina in the nucleus, which is basically a layer that is underneath the nuclear rim called the nuclear lamina. And I have an interest to study these proteins and what other proteins they interact with and how they may affect cell signaling and cell phenotype and cell function in relation to cancer and to cardiomyopathies. I think a biomedical researcher, whether that researcher is a student or at the level of even a master's student or a PhD student or a postdoc or even a researcher who's a faculty member, we are in critical thinking at any given moment when we're doing our work. You are in critical thinking status when you're in the TC room splitting your cells, or when you're actually performing an experiment on the bench, or when you're looking at your immunoblot data on an X-ray film and observing your bands and trying to make sense of the bands that appeared, or when you're actually recording your notebook. An idea may hit you while you're actually recording. What did you do today? Sometimes when the students are discussing things, each one is on a bench and they're actually talking over the bench. Each one is performing something. Let's say one is doing PCR, the other one is doing immunofluorescence, and they're talking. I'm here in my office and I'm hearing them conversing, and suddenly just an idea hits one because one of them says something that triggers an idea to them. Say, maybe I should try that then. At the same time, when you write grants, you may get critical thinking. It may prompt you to think of something. Plus, also when you read the literature, because you relate your work to others, and when you read others' work. So I don't think you ever stop critical thinking in our profession. When you're asked to write a term paper or a descriptive summary of something, that's totally different from writing for science. There is a different element for scientific writing. There is a structured way for scientific writing, although that structured way is flexible, but it is structured somehow. And there are actually key elements in scientific writing that absolutely have to be there, and there is a structure for them. The first time I realized I was such a clumsy scientific writer when I had to write my first abstract for a conference. So my PhD mentor asked me to write the abstract. And here I come, I draft the abstract, and I was so happy with it, thinking that I did such an excellent job. And I sent the abstract to Jacques, and Jacques returns it literally red. It was like a 500, 600 word abstract. When it came back, I was so embarrassed. That was the first time he realized that I had no clue what an abstract in biological writing was all about, and that I had to actually enter a sentence to lead to the gap in knowledge, to lead to the central question and the hypothesis, to lead to then the objective of the study and the methods and the results, etc. Although that was actually, now when I think about it, It should have been very clear to me, but somehow I had missed it. So I had kind of like, I had all the right ideas, but they were mixed up and just thrown on the paper initially in random order. He sat next to me and he said, okay, let's sit down and discuss how you need to do this. So he sat down because he looked at my face and he saw the shock on my face, and he said, let me explain to you what's wrong with this. So first, you need to include this in your abstract. Second, you need to include that. Third, you need to mention this. Fourth, etc. So then he said, okay, now that I explained this, rewrite the abstract. So it was nice. We gave it a second try, and since then I started to improve. And the more you do writing, the better you get at it. I honestly spent, on average, an hour and a half to 2 hours dealing with emails every day. From writing emails to vendors, suppliers, requesting price codes for items, writing emails to justify why I need these cell lines to bring them to the country, and writing a statement to the purchase department to send to the Ministry of Health to allow clearance at the airport for a few items, etc. So these emails do take time, and I think I even train my graduate students, especially the master's students, how to write them. The other writing that we do, of course, research proposals for grants. It's my job to write the research proposals for the grants, or if I co-write a grant with a collaborator, the collaborator may contribute to the grant writing. The other form of writing also we do, it's basically the progress reports for the grants. If it's a 2-year or a 3-year grant, every year you have to write a progress report. So that's another level of writing. So the progress report has a different format, different level, because there you need to put the data and the detailed results and any changes you've made to the research plan and what's to come. Did you meet the timeline? Are you making changes to the timeline, etc. Perhaps the most challenging form of writing and the most enjoyable, it's writing the manuscript. And that's the key, because this is the final output that you're going to share with the scientific community at large, and that's going to go eventually to be available for the public at large, especially now with the open access journals, for all the scientific readers to read, from students to even well-established investigators. And a lot of caution has to go into writing the papers, because also writing the paper can make a difference in many instances as to whether the editor may decide to send it for reviewers or not. If you have very good science but it's a clumsy write-up, the editor might decide upfront not to send to reviewers, because may not even get the point from even just reading the title and the abstract. Or even if the decision is made to send to reviewers, if it's a messed up write-up, the reviewers may decide to flunk the paper because they missed the point, since the write-up is very weak. So scientific writing for a manuscript, in my opinion, especially research papers, not review articles, it is the most challenging, but at the same time, for me, it's the most enjoyable. By the time a proposal is drafted and you submit it for grant funding and the grant comes and you do the research, science is actually progressing very fast, especially in the biomedical field. Much updated literature, you have to make much update to the literature. So when you write the introduction for your manuscript, you can't just stick to the text that was written and to the introduction or the background coverage that was written for the grant proposal. Otherwise, your intro or your background in your paper would be outdated. Second, depending on where the manuscript is going, to which journal, you may have to amend the writing style a little bit. So sometimes you have to simplify a little bit the background, sometimes you may have to make it more detailed, sometimes you may have to trim and become a bit more in-depth because it may come across as superficial background. Your final methodology in the paper has to reflect the changes you've made practically, and it has to reflect absolutely what has been done in the lab and not what was proposed initially. I always remind my graduate students when they write, even when they write the proposals or when they write their thesis, but also to keep in mind when they write even their assignments in their courses, in their graduate courses, and that's an advice even I give in my writing assignments in my undergraduate courses. Always remember two things in any writing assignment: context and scope. What's the context of your writing and the scope of your writing? How broad you want to be, or how focused you want to be in your writing, and what context, what's the context of your write-up? Otherwise, you may miss the point. And it's difficult, sometimes it's very tricky. For instance, personally, I'm very detail-oriented. One of my most recent manuscripts, I had a very hard time trimming the results section. So even my co-authors, they kept saying, it's like, Diana, just to trim the results section, it's too lengthy. It's too lengthy. We're going above and beyond the word number. When we first submitted, the 3 reviewers came back exactly with that single comment. Results section, too much detailed, too long, unnecessary text, unnecessary elaboration on detail. It could be easily trimmed by 500 words. So even though I tell my students, keep remembering the scope and the context, sometimes even with the best of intentions, you still do it yourself. Lab notebook writing is for recording work and recording data. So it's to record your everyday stuff and what you do, and to report what you've been doing and what you're up to and what you got. As I said, it's to actually protect you and protect the scientific community, to make sure that there is no data manipulation, no data fabrication. Also, if you got something interesting or there is a mistake, you could trace it back to see where the mix-up. Let's say a student mixed up 2 cell lines in the tissue culture room. And at some point, we need to trace back to make sure when did this mix-up happen or passage mix-up. You could trace back in the notebook to see when the student split them, did the passage split in the TC room. So it's things like this that's very important. But and it depends really on the nature of the project, where the lab notebook may be more important than others, at times more than others. Reading is very important. We focus a lot on the students, perhaps in biology, gaining the facts and studying them and memorizing. But I think it's very important if they read. First, it of course makes them better readers. Second, it makes them better critical thinkers than just memorizing facts. And third, better writers. I personally believe that you cannot be a good writer if you're not a good reader. In biomedical research, it's no longer a choice not to read and regularly, and it has to be directed reading also. Not reading the classical way. Directed reading, like in other words, selective directed reading, because there is tons of literature that's coming out on a regular basis. So you have to be selective in what you choose to read. Maybe some papers you want to just focus on the abstract and just read the intro. Other papers you need to read the whole paper from A to Z, including the results and the discussion, and really deconstruct that paper, because it's absolutely important for your PhD thesis or your master's project or your own ongoing work in the lab. And a third paper, maybe you just need to be aware of it, because it would be embarrassing if you're not aware of that discovery in your field. When I was a PhD student at McGill University, I was always behind in my literature updates. So always I was stressed. Although I was doing very good in my courses at the university and in my research in the lab, but I always had stacks of papers related to my PhD project and the field I was in that I wasn't able to catch up with. And I would read a paper or two, and then 5 more added to the list, and then 3 or 4, and then 10 more added to the list. So I was always behind. And at some point, one day, my PhD mentor comes back from his clinic. He's an MD scientist. Around 9 p.m. and he walks into the lab and he says, I was doing this. He says, what's the matter? Something wrong with your project? I said, no, but I have no idea how to get rid of this pileup. So he says, he looks at one of the papers in front of me and he finds these markers, and the whole paper is like orange and pink and orange and pink. And he says, you're not reading the paper, you're memorizing it. And this is why it takes you. So he says, how long it takes you to read a paper like this? So I said, about 6 hours and a half. And he nearly collapsed. So he said, this is not good, my dear. Of course, you're going to be always behind. So you have to actually read more efficiently. So for me, what I was doing when I was reading every line, every single word I did not understand or everything was like new to me, I would go to the internet and I would search it. So I was doing a lot of sidetracking. By the time you finish the intro and the paper, you haven't even started the message and the results, it would already be 2 hours. And then kind of you feel it's like, oh my gosh, reading is such a heavy thing. And then you've already missed the point of the whole manuscript because you're actually having very many intermittent breaks and sidetracking. So, and there is really no point in doing this. There is really no benefit in doing this. Sometimes it's not something that's wrong with the English. It's actually the actual level of the biology and the science that's there. So some are better than others at how they tackle the science itself. So there it also depends on their level, scientific level. How strong they are in the field itself, not how strong they are as writers. My contribution is to prompt the student to improve herself or himself, not in writing, in tackling the biology itself. So they need to do more strengthening of on their weak points in the field of biology, not in the writing. And this is usually what I find about our students, not the writing itself. I don't see at all that being English not being my as a second spoken language for me, being a hindrance for me in my field at all. Yeah. It's a language I feel very comfortable using in my job, in my profession, whether be it in teaching or in research, and whether I'm doing writing grants or I'm communicating with the graduate students or writing papers. One thing about the use of English in biomedical research or in biomedical teaching is that the best way you could say a sentence is the simplest way. So even in the best, highest impact journals, you don't have to be exotic about saying anything. The most straightforward, the most brief way, and the simplest terms that you could use to state a fact in biology that you may use, a reviewer and an editor would be so happy with. This, I think, is something that makes English a very, very nice language for everyone, even for someone who's not a native speaker in English, and their English somewhat might not be so strong, to use English in scientific writing or scientific teaching. Because the simplest way you could say something or you could write something with is the right way. Although I love the Arabic language, but I love the Arabic language to read Arabic literature and poetry. I find a huge difficulty because I never studied science in Arabic first, because here in Lebanon, in our curriculum, you study science either in English or in French, depending on the school you go to. So I'm not familiar at all with the biology or the scientific terminologies in any other language other than English. English is the language in the biomedical field, at least in my field. This is the language worldwide. Whether you're a scientist in Europe or you're a scientist in South America or in North America or in East Asia or wherever you are, if you want to be heard by the scientific community and read by the scientific community, you basically have to publish your science in English.